What if Deku had the Carnage Symbiote? Would Deku still grow up to become a heroic person? Would Deku's personality change? What would have to change in the story for Deku to have these events happen? Well, you're about to find out. Alright, so I'm guessing a couple of you guys are probably like, Zether, bro, where is your intro? Now, not gonna lie to you guys, I just wanted to try something different for once. You know, I wanted to do a little spicy, you know what I'm saying? I wanted to add a little bit of spice into the intro, so I decided to do something new. But don't worry, I am going to continue doing my yo, what is up guys, all the way for the foreseeable future. That being said, let's get into the what if. Alright, so this story is definitely going to be a little bit of a darker one, just to start everything off. You guys are definitely going to be advised right now that this story is not going to be some happy where Deku becomes the hero of the world and Deku just becomes some savior. No, Deku's going to have a horrible childhood. Deku is going to experience a bunch of things that some people may not be okay with hearing. So if you're not and you fall under that category, then I would suggest clicking off of the video now. If you're okay with watching that type of stuff, then, well, hope you enjoy the video. Let's get started. Okay, so we're going to be starting off our story the day that Deku was born. On this particular day, Deku would have his parents around and it would be a pretty good childhood, honestly. Deku would have his mother and father around and they would both be very loving and caring individuals. However, they would run into money issues. Along the lines, Hisashi would end up losing his job, causing them to lose a lot of their income. His job, which he has in the original canon, which is overseas, ends up being lost. And after this, Hisashi ends up having a lot of problems when it comes to Inko and Deku. He's struggling to maintain them, and a lot of the times he's struggling to put food on the table. He still struggles to ask Inko to work herself, but Hisashi, after dealing for this for about 1 year, decides that enough is enough. He's tired of this. He's gonna leave them. He would get his things and go for the milk, as Hisashi never returns. After this, Inko would blame everything on Deku. It's his fault that Hisashi left her. It's Deku's fault that she's alone and now has to work all these shifts. And now, she begins to beat Deku every day. Every day when Deku gets home from school and gets belittled by Bakugou, it seems as if things only get worse when he arrives home. Inko would almost never cook for Deku, beating him constantly, always reminding Deku that he will never amount to anything. Deku lives like this for the next foreseeable couple of years, and Deku is just treated horribly. That being said, Deku would be about 5 years old and he still hasn't been taken to the quirk doctor to see what his quirk is. So Deku would not know anything. He wouldn't know if he has a quirk or not, and the kids at school would just simply assume that he doesn't, which is the truth. Deku was born quirkless in this world, where powers are a common thing. And Deku would end up getting bullied more and more every day at school. Before, at least he had something to look forward to. He used to look forward to hanging out with Bakugou and his friends. He used to look forward to being one of Bakugou's lackeys, being alongside of him with that amazing quirk of his, with all those talents and skills that Bakugou had. Deku loved being friends with Bakugou, but after it was announced that he was quirkless, Deku just was thrown to the side. After that, Bakugou began to bully Deku every day, and when Deku would speak about dreams of becoming a pro hero in the future, Bakugou would belittle him, always telling him that he will never amount to anything. And this is when Deku would realize that no matter where he goes, his life is always going to be a living hell. This would continue. Bakugou's bullying would get worse and worse. Deku would get beaten almost every day at school, and when he would return home, he would get beaten by his mother as well. She would beat him with a pan, and it would be hot as well. But Deku was used to it. All of Bakugou's explosions numbed him to the pain. So every day, Deku would just cover his head as she would smack him with the tool, and she would then tell Deku to make the food. As Deku, at this tender age of just 6 years old, would have to make food for his mother every day. She would get home a stinking drunk every single day. As a lot of you guys who are probably like, who really like Inko, are probably like, yo, what's going on, Zether? Calm down, bro. But it's necessary. She would continue to beat Deku. And this would lead to Deku just going down a spiraling hole of hating his life. Deku would go to school only to get beat by Bakugou, and when he would return, the cycle would continue. If it wasn't Bakugou, it was his mother. Deku would always cry himself to sleep every single night, thinking why were these cards given to him? If only his father would have never lost his job, maybe things would be different. Maybe his story would have gone the same as the one that we normally get, but instead, these were the cards that he was given. And Bakugou would continue the merciless beating on Deku. Inka would never be able to say a word because, well, she doesn't care. Every time that she sees Deku with burn marks, she would smile and smirk. Not only that, but she would call Mitsuki to tell her how great Bakugou is. And on a regular, she would actually invite Bakugou over to her house, as she knows that Bakugou hated Izuku. So anytime that he would be over, he would always take the chance when Inko was away, which was always, to beat on Deku and make sure that he knew that he was nothing. This would continue for years to come until one day, we're going to be having a little bit of a time skip. Deku would be in the back of the class on the day of the sludge villain incident, as Deku would simply just be sitting there, laying there, saying not a word. Deku would be sitting in the back of the class as the teacher would begin to say who's going to what schools, and when it comes to Deku, he's not even going to try out for the hero school. Deku lost all hopes for that dream. Now the only thing that Deku wants is to get away from Bakugou. He wants to get away from his mother. He wants to just stop living this life, this hell. It's horrible. Deku can't stand another day. This is when the class would end and Bakugou and his Goonies would go up to Deku as they would see that Deku has these lifeless eyes. Bakugou would push Deku into the wall as he's about to leave and say, "Do something about it." Deku would sit there and say not a word, giving him that expressionless face. Bakugou would see this and get a little scared at this as he would then push Deku and throw an explosion at him. He would say, "Come on, say something, Deku." This is when Deku would just pick up his notebooks and say, What do you want me to say, Bakugou? What do you want me to say? If I say something, you'll beat me. Have a scar ever since I was 4 years old from you. Another one every year. They just seem to get worse and worse. What do you want me to say? His lackeys would look at Deku as Deku would unbutton his shirt and see all the scars and scratches that have been laid down from Bakugou. Deku at this point would have 4th degree burn marks all over his body. And he would say, "I'm numb to the pain, Bakugou. You can throw explosions at me all day, but it won't hurt me. I'm used to it. If it's not you, it's my mother. Now get out of my way." Bakugou would just stand there in just complete silence. He would look at Deku, and Deku would end up just basically walking away from Bakugou. This is when Bakugou would say, "Stop, Deku. I gotta tell you something." Deku would stop to hear Bakugou's words. All he wanted to hear was a sorry. He wanted to hear I apologize, but no, those weren't the words that he heard. Instead, Bakugou tightened his fist and with anger in his voice said, "You know, Deku, if you really want to become a pro hero, then there might just be one way for you to do it." Deku's ears would perk up as he would say, "Why don't you go to the top of the roof and jump off the building? Maybe that way when you get reincarnated into your next life, you might be born with a quirk." Deku, after hearing this, would say not a word as he would begin to walk up the stairs. This is when Bakugou and his Goonies would notice this but just say nothing, as they would go down and they would begin to head off. This is when Deku would go to the top of the building and just have a bunch of thoughts going through his mind. If he goes home, he's just going to get beat. If he goes down and tries to say a thing to Bakugou, the result will be the same. This life it isn't worth living. Deku, in an instant, would jump off as he would close his eyes and prepare for death. Deku, while he was falling, would feel a strange goo on his body. Deku would open his eyes, and a red substance would cover Deku's body. This is when it would enter inside of him, and Deku would fall onto the ground. You can hear a loud thump as Bakugou would hear it, and he and his Goonies would rush over to Deku's location. As I keep saying Goonies, but what I mean to say is goons would rush over to Deku's location as they would see Deku on the ground, bleeding so much. The bleeding would not stop. Bakugou would say, "Deku!" as he would rush over to him and say, "Please, please, please be alive. Be alive." You would feel Deku's heartbeat and nothing. Not a thing. Not a pulse. There's nothing there. Deku is dead. There's not a thing anybody can do for him. He's beyond saving now. Bakugou would sit there as tears would go down his face, and he would then look at his friends as he would say, "We gotta get out of here. Let's go." This is when everybody would run away, and Bakugou would call the police saying that there's a kid who jumped off the roof. They need emergency. The hospital would arrive with Bakugou as well, and it's at this point that they would see that the body was gone. Deku was not there anymore. Deku would wake up a couple of hours later inside of some abandoned warehouse as Deku would look around and see nothing. There's not a thing in sight. Deku would begin to look around as he would open his eyes and he would see something. a red goo. It would say, ah, perfect. You're alive. Inside of Deku's head, he can hear a voice. Carnage. This is when Deku would ask, what's there? As Carnage would begin to explain that he's a friend. And many of you guys are probably wondering, how did Carnage get there? Well, Carnage escaped from a lab a couple of moments before Deku ran away, and it saw the opportunity. A person who was vulnerable, weak, someone who could easily be corrupted. And so, Carnage took the opportunity, and it just so happened that Deku was a perfect match. After this, he would begin to ask Deku what's wrong, as Deku would begin to spill the beans on his story. He would say, what's it to you? You saved my life, didn't you? You should have just let me die. Carnage would immediately look at Deku as he would say, don't say that. He would begin to put on an act, as he would act as if he was Deku's friend, telling him that with him, he's never going to have to worry about injuries ever again. Deku would say that that's nothing new. He hasn't had to worry about injuries ever since he was 12 years old. He's been numb to it for about the last 2 years. Carnage would smirk, saying, perfect. As it to this point that he would say, so kid, what's somebody like you doing jumping off the roof? Deku would begin to explain his life story as Carnage would act as if he has some sort of sympathy towards him, but there's really nothing. Carnage would begin to use Deku, begin to manipulate him, using his knowledge to tell Deku that he's going to be a friend, that no longer will he ever have to fear anything. Carnage would begin to manipulate Deku slowly, corrupting him, explaining a very fake fabricated story which Deku would of course believe. And after hours of talking, Carnage would convince Deku that the reason that he was treated like this was because of hero society. Deku needs to crush all of those who belittled him. Deku needs to kill all of the fake heroes. And not only that, but Deku needs to make his mother pay. After this, Carnage would laugh internally as he would say, what do you say we pay your mother a visit? This is when Deku would end up smirking a very just corrupted smile. Deku would say, yeah, let's pay her a visit. It's at this point that Deku and Carnage would end up heading off towards the area that Inko works at. As they would arrive, and Inko would actually be working alone on this day. Let's just say that Inko works at a dry cleaning place, and they would arrive in there as she would hear the little bell chime. This is when she would see Deku walk in there. She would say, what are you doing here? Go home. Go make dinner already. She would begin to slap Deku as Deku would look down at the ground and say, you know, mother, I kind of got used to that. Some way along the lines, I began to think that that was the way that you showed me love, but I guess now I know that you always hated me. And I guess deep down, I always hated you too. This is when Inko would say, what are you talking about? Get out of here. As she would begin to hit Deku, literally punching him in the face. As Deku would get shoved onto the ground, Deku would rub his face and the injury would heal. She would say, what? As Deku would basically begin to get up slowly as tendrils would appear out of his back in a face very, very similar to Kaneki from Tokyo Ghoul. This is when Deku would have one of those tendrils pierce Inko's abdominal area as it would poke a perfect hole inside of Inko. Inko would let out a scream which would go into the heavens and people would hear this as Deku, no, I said hear this, but what I meant was wouldn't hear this because Deku would cover her mouth with his hand as he would say, shh, 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 shh. Now, mother, we wouldn't want anybody to catch us, would we? As he would end up, wrapping his tendrils around her. This is when Inko would try to scream as Deku would pierce her again and again and again. The blood would go all over the place, but you couldn't tell. Deku's symbiote is red. It appeared as if nothing was on him. Deku let out a roar as he then proceeded to eat Inko. As Deku would smirk right after this. This is when Deku's mind would completely or almost completely corrupt. Deku would smirk as he would say, it's time that I take it out on the rest of the people who've done me wrong. Deku would go to the schools. He would break in at the dawn of night. He would go into the principal's office as he would then begin to look through the files, searching for those kids that always made his life a living hell. He's going to start off with Bakugou's friends and work his way up to the leader. Bakugou's going to die the most gruesome death. As Deku would find out the location of all of them, he would write it down on a piece of paper, but Carnage would say that there's no need. His memory is perfect. He has photographic memory. Deku would smile as he would say, well, what are we waiting for? Deku would begin to climb on top of the building, as he would jump from roof to roof, finally arriving at the first target's home. The kid would be laying asleep in his bed. He would be living in a 2-story house, as Deku would end up climbing in through the kid's window. This is when the kid would be fast asleep, as Deku would end up covering his mouth with his tendrils. No noise could escape, and this is when Deku would create a giant scythe with his other hand. He would shove it into the kid's heart, as the kid would die right then and there. And this is when Deku would go inside of the house, as he would continue on and kill the entirety of his family. Deku would then explode the building as he would rush out of there and roar. Everybody could hear this, and pro heroes would swarm the scene, seeing the horrendous sight that they had to behold. Deku would then go on to the next and the next person. He would kill them all. Every single one of them who had ever done him wrong would die on this night. Not a single survivor will be left. Not a single person would survive. They would all ask for mercy, but let me ask you guys this. Have you guys ever spared a cow or an ant? If the answer is no, then that's exactly how Deku viewed them, as weaklings, people who didn't deserve mercy. He would slaughter each and every single one of them. Woman, man, and child would die on this night, and Deku would finally get to the final target, Katsuki Bakugou. Deku would arrive to his house as he would slowly make his way there. A couple of pro heroes would end up trying to stand in Deku's way, but Deku using his tendrils would kill them all. He would shove them into buildings, pierce a couple through the heart, and simply snap their necks. Anytime a bullet was shot at him or a quirk was used, Deku was able to tank it. And even when a fire user came at him, the company which actually took care of Carnage realized the weakness: fire and sound, and so they kept using experiments on Carnage to keep him on the wraps, but that just made Carnage stronger. Only flames on the scale of endeavors would be able to harm him, and not only that, but only President Mike's quirk would be able to hurt Deku at this point. That being said, there isn't a hero alive who could stop him other than those two. They're his first priorities after Bakugou. That being said, this is when Deku would break into Bakugou's house, and he would start by killing his mother, then his father, and he would finally make his way towards Bakugou's room. Deku would proceed to use those tendrils as he would wrap them around Bakugou and say, "Hey." This is when Bakugou would see Deku and say, "You're alive! Deku, how did you?" Deku would cover his mouth as Bakugou would say, try to struggle to breathe. His eyes would say nothing but sorrow as he would say, "Deku, please, I'm sorry." As soon as Deku could hear those words, he would stop, and for an instant Deku would give Bakugou a second to say something. Bakugou would get free as he would then say, "I thought you died. What are you doing here, Deku? And how did you get a quirk?" He would then say, "Never mind all that. Deku, I don't know if you're real. Maybe I made you myself. Maybe I'm dreaming, but it doesn't matter how I get this chance. I may never get this chance again. I'm sorry, Deku, for everything. From the day we were 4 years old, I bullied you because I was afraid. I was afraid of you, Deku. I was afraid that someday that heroic nature of yours would make you somebody, a beacon of hope. I was afraid that you were going to be better than me. I may have had a stronger quirk than you, but deep down, I always knew. For some reason, you always seemed to be 2 steps ahead of me, Deku, and I couldn't handle that. This god complex of mine didn't let me see through everything. Maybe if I was to have been kinder to you, we wouldn't have ended up this way. I'm sorry, Deku. I should have never treated you that way. And if there's any way you could ever forgive me, then I'd be willing to do anything for it, Deku. I'm truly sorry." Deku would pause as a Carnage Symbiote would come out of Deku's neck, and he would say, "Come on, how dare you falter? Did he ever falter when he shot an explosion at you? Did he ever falter when he hurt you, when he consistently beat you? If you didn't falter with your mother, then kill him! Kill him now!" This is when Deku, after hearing those words, would pause as a tendril would come out of Deku's back, and Bakugou would have his eyes widen. Deku would go in to shove the tendrils as he would say, "No. He apologized. That's all I ever wanted. I didn't mean to do all this. This was a mistake. I gotta turn myself in." This is when Bakugou would be standing there as Carnage would say, "I knew you were weak." He would take over Deku's body as he would chop Bakugou's head clean off. And it's at this point that Carnage would then let out a scream that would reach the heavens. This is when Carnage would begin the true destruction. Carnage would go around the city, destroying everything. Man, woman, and child wouldn't be safe. It didn't matter if you crossed Deku before or after. Deku was gonna kill you. If you were standing in his way, there was going to be zero hope for you. Pro heroes all over the city of Japan would begin to rush at the city that Deku lives in, but Carnage would dismantle each one of them, creating a bunch of copies of himself that would just go up to them and cut them in half. He would knock most of them out, and he'd eat a bunch more for the energy, I guess you could say. And Deku would begin to destroy the entirety of the city. This is when more and more and more heroes would begin to arrive, and it's at this point that we would see a bunch of fire heroes arriving at the scene. They would shoot flames at Deku, to which Deku would roar at, causing the flames to disperse, and he would then rush at the fire heroes, killing them instantly, not giving them a second to react. After this is when the main dish itself would finally arrive. Endeavor. This is when Endeavor would shoot a flame arrow right at Carnage, which would cause Carnage to scream in pain. He would let out a gigantic roar. So he would basically let out a scream, to which Endeavor would smirk and say, "So, flames is your weakness, huh? Looks like this is going to be a job for the number 2. He would look around and seeing all the death, all the people who he laid waste to, and get angered. He would then rush at Carnage, as Carnage would do the same, and he would shoot flames at Deku. Deku would begin to get pushed back, but Deku would remember all of the things. Remember the fake heroes, as at this point Deku would get an angered expression on his face, and he would end up actually causing Carnage to go away. As Deku would begin to rush at Endeavor, this is when Carnage would slowly be corrupting Deku's mind more and more. But the internal Deku would be fighting to be free, fighting to not be taken over by this thing. As Carnage would rush at Endeavor, they would have an intense battle. Endeavor would shoot flames at Deku as he would keep him at bay, and Carnage would land a couple of strikes. He would cut Endeavor here and there. Not only that, but he would almost be about to kill him if it wasn't for the fact that All Might arrived and punched Deku just in time. Deku's head would have been flung away, as it basically came back to him in a Orochimaru fashion, as Endeavor was flung into about 4 buildings, and All Might ended up helping Endeavor to his feet. This is when both of them would begin to rush at All Might. I mean, not All Might, but at Carnage, as this is when the real battle started. We would have an insane battle between Carnage and All Might and Endeavor. It would be a 3-way battle. Deku would be having to fight against both of them at the same time. And if I'm being honest, Carnage could definitely do it. I mean, dude, have you guys seen how powerful Carnage is in the comics? I'm not using the one that we saw in the movie because, I mean, while that one is powerful, it's nowhere near the one in the comics. The strength that Carnage really shows. He would begin to dismantle All Might limb by limb, as Carnage would end up destroying Endeavor. He would end up literally removing one of Endeavor's wait, no, I'm not gonna cause him to lose any limbs just yet. He would end up punching Endeavor so hard in the gut that Endeavor loses his wins, and this is when more and more heroes would arrive. Aizawa would arrive at the scene as he would use his quirk canceling quirk, and that would do not a thing. It wouldn't do anything. This is when President Mike would let out a giant scream as he would say, "Oh yeah!" shooting a gigantic pulse of a sound right at Deku's direction. The symbiote would begin to scream out in pain, as this is when they would realize, sound. Everybody would start trying to make as much sound as possible, but it wouldn't be able to do a thing. Deku would be able to resist it. The only sound that was able to hurt him was that of President Mike. Deku would begin to fight against it, or more specifically, Carnage would. As the sound was going through, the symbiote would go away for a second, and this is when All Might could see it. Deku, he looked scared, as if he was crying for help. You could see teardrops rushing down Deku's face as he would scream out, "Help me!" Deku would say that out loud as All Might could hear those screams for help, and he would get his second wind. He would then say, "I'm gonna have to use all of my strength." He would say, "Plus Ultra," as he would rush at Carnage's direction, as President Mike would begin to scream, and we would then have All Might barely being able to grab Deku by the shirt as he yanks him out, similar to the way that he ended up saving Bakugou. This is when Carnage would get angered, as Deku would be thrown to the side. Carnage would latch onto All Might's body. as this is when All Might would begin to get overrun by the symbiote, and he would then see that All Might was not a perfect match, as he would immediately impale All Might straight in the stomach, causing All Might to die, and he would then jump back onto Deku. Present Mike would then proceed to instantly shoot more and more sound waves at Deku, as Deku would be saved this time, not by anybody other than Gran Torino. However, right as he puts Deku down, the symbiote noticing that there's another perfect match among them, the symbiote would stab right into Deku's heart, as Deku would fall onto the ground, right as Deku thought he was safe. Excuse me for that. Right as Deku thought he was safe, he would be impaled from the back, as Deku would fall down onto the ground, having not a thing to say. This is when Deku would fall onto his knees. Blood would start to come all out of Deku's mouth, as Deku would fall and die. This is when Carnage would begin to destroy more and more heroes, as he would end up latching onto Endeavor, one of the only heroes who could make a stand. Carnage would go within Endeavor's body, and he would then shoot flames straight at Present Mike, as Present Mike would try to stop Deku, but there would be no use. Endeavor and Carnage would be able to destroy Present Mike, killing him, and he would dismantle each and every single one of the villains left. This is when the carnage would continue for more and more hours, as the city of Japan would begin to be destroyed by Carnage little by little. The #1 hero was destroyed. People all over the world would go into panic and chaos. But however, this is when the lab that created Carnage would finally be able to get a solution. They would cause a satellite to let out a sonic boom that would definitely have more than enough power to cause Carnage to be weakened just enough for some pro heroes to be able to take him down. They would let out the signal as Carnage would scream in pain and so much agony. Heroes would come in as they would immediately trap Carnage inside of a tube which would be able to hold him, and this is when they would pretty much proceed to keep him in there, as a bunch of flame heroes would come in and they would all put their flames together as they would proceed to burn Carnage, destroying the symbiote, or at least they thought they did. That being said, that is where I'm going to be ending What If Deku Had the Carnage Symbiote. Little bit of a darker story, little bit of a darker turn at the end. This story was definitely not one of my happier ones. Little bit on the darker side. However, I do hope that you guys continue to enjoy this story. Tomorrow, I'm probably going to not be uploading a video. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to be going out with my girlfriend, so I am going to be taking a little bit of a day off. Not sure if I will or will not upload. It's still not 100% sure. However, if I do upload, I'm probably going to be uploading let's see, what will I be uploading? Probably something along the lines of Winter Soldier Deku, or what if Gohan had God Ki, something along those lines. That being said though, guys, I love each and every single one of you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed the story, and with that being said, Zether out. Peace.